Nearly a century ago, in the middle of the Great Depression, a skyscraper rose over Midtown Manhattan in New York City that wasn't just built to be tall. It was built to win. Today, that building is known as the Empire State Building.
It is the world's most famous building, and it is the home and source of dreams in everybody's heart, collectively, in the world, in all cultures, in all languages.
But here's the surprising part. This building, completed in 1931, is still generating hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Think about that for a moment. A skyscraper designed during the Great Depression, still financially outperforming many modern buildings built with today's technology. So the real question is, how did the Empire State Building break the rules and build a money empire? Most skyscrapers are built as symbols, statements of wealth, engineering, or ambition. But the Empire State Building was designed differently. From the very beginning, it was engineered to be a long-term, money-making system. Because here's the strange reality of skyscraper economics. The taller a building becomes, the more expensive it is to construct, the more complex it becomes to operate, and the less efficient the space inside often becomes. Every additional floor requires more structure, more elevators, and leaves less rentable space. So in theory, taller buildings should become less profitable, not more. And yet, this building did the opposite. It became the tallest in the world, was built in record time, and remained financially successful for decades. Which raises the key question: what did they do differently? The answer is simple, but powerful. The designers didn't just think like architects, they thought like economists. They treated the skyscraper not just as a structure, but as a business, stacked vertically. In this video, we'll break down the race that pushed developers to build higher, the hidden economic problems that make skyscrapers risky, the clever design decisions that solve those problems, and how those decisions still generate revenue today. Because the Empire State Building wasn't just built to shape the skyline, it was built to generate income for generations. Height made it famous, but economics made it successful. To understand why the Empire State Building exists, it helps to go back to the 1920s, a time when cities around the world were changing rapidly. Businesses were expanding, populations were growing, and demand for office space was rising at an unprecedented pace. Cities were not just getting larger, they were becoming denser. So the question became, where does all that growth go? For many cities, the answer was simple: you build upward. But that was not always practical. Before steel frame construction, buildings relied on thick, load-bearing walls to support their weight. As buildings grew taller, those walls had to become thicker and heavier, eventually reaching a point where adding more height no longer made sense. At a certain point, you were building more walls than usable space. Steel changed that. With steel frame construction, buildings no longer depended on massive walls for support. This allowed structures to rise much higher, without sacrificing as much interior space. And once developers understood that, the opportunity became clear. More height meant more space meant more tenants, and more tenants meant more revenue.
It was truly magnificent what they did. They replaced a lot of the building with glass and added so much of the observation towers. More spectacular to me now because I could realize how important it was.
Nowhere was this more important than in New York City, where land was limited. The financial industry was expanding rapidly, and demand for office space was extremely high. If you owned land in Manhattan, every square foot mattered. Expanding outward wasn't really an option. So what was left? Up. This sparked the race into the sky, where developers competed to build taller and taller structures. On the surface, it looked like a contest of prestige. But underneath, it was driven by economics. Skyscrapers were becoming vertical real estate businesses. Each additional floor increased earning potential, at least in theory. Which raises an important question. Does adding more floors always make a building more profitable? Two businessmen, John Raskob and Al Smith, believed they could take this idea further. Their goal wasn't just to build tall, but to build the most economically successful skyscraper ever constructed. Because in the end, the building itself wasn't the product. The real product was the space inside it. Taller buildings look more valuable. They dominate skylines and signal economic power. But from a financial perspective, they often become less profitable the higher they go. That sounds backwards at first. But once you look at the numbers, it starts to make sense. Every additional floor increases cost. Taller buildings require stronger structures, more materials, and more complex engineering to handle wind and weight. Each extra level becomes more expensive than the one before it. And that's just the outside. The bigger problem shows up inside. As buildings get taller, usable space actually starts to shrink. Why? Elevators. People still need to move up and down, and that requires large vertical shafts running through the entire building. Those shafts take up space that could otherwise be rented out. In simple terms, parts of every floor stop generating income. In traditional pyramid-shaped designs, most workers are concentrated on lower floors. Elevators at the bottom get crowded, while those serving upper floors are underused. Adding more elevators helps, but it also means sacrificing even more rentable space. Zoning laws made things even more complicated by forcing buildings into stepped, pyramid-like shapes. This created more space at the bottom, but less of the high-value space at the top, where offices with better light and views could command much higher rent. Which leads to the key insight. The goal wasn't maximizing total space. It was maximizing valuable space. But here's the problem. Most buildings at the time weren't designed for that. So the real question becomes, how do you build higher without destroying the value of the space inside? This is where the Empire State Building does something different. The breakthrough wasn't just engineering. It was understanding the rules better than everyone else. New York's zoning laws required buildings to stay within a sloped height limit to prevent them from blocking too much sunlight, which is why many skyscrapers at the time had that stepped, pyramid-like shape. But there was a small detail in those rules that most architects overlooked. If a building covered only 25% of its lot, it was allowed to rise straight up beyond that limit. So the designers asked a simple but powerful question. What if we shrink the building earlier, so we can go much higher later?
Would not be nearly deep enough to support a 102-story skyscraper. So after demolishing the Waldorf, down to ground, you had to then excavate in order to create the foundations for the Empire State Building. So then you need excavators as well. And that involves rock drillers and carting away vast amounts of rock and soil.
Instead of gradually tapering like a pyramid, they introduced early setbacks around the 5th, 20th, and 30th floors. After that, the tower rises almost straight upward for dozens of floors. The result was a building that looked tall and narrow, but more importantly, one that was far more efficient. And that efficiency translated directly into money. This design created more window-facing offices, which were the most valuable spaces in the building. Offices with natural light, better views, and distance from street noise could command significantly higher rent. At the same time, elevators were concentrated into a central core, reducing wasted space and freeing up more of each floor for tenants. In total, the building delivered nearly 3 million square feet of rentable space. But more importantly, a larger share of that space was premium. The developers also made a bold bet on location. Instead of building in Lower Manhattan, They purchased the former Waldorf Astoria site in Midtown for $16 million, anticipating that the city's business center would move north. At the time, it was a risk. In hindsight, it was one of the smartest real estate decisions ever made. In other words, the Empire State Building wasn't just tall. It was designed to make each floor worth more. And that's what made the difference. The Empire State Building is often remembered as a symbol of ambition, of engineering, of a race to build higher than anyone else. But that's only part of the story. Because behind the height, behind the skyline, there was a different idea at work. Every design decision, from the setbacks, to the elevator layout, to the mix of revenue streams, was built around one question. How do you make this building work financially, not just structurally? And that's what made the difference. At a time when most skyscrapers were chasing prestige, this one was designed to generate value. Not just once, but over decades. And it worked. Nearly a century later, it's still producing hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Not because it's the tallest, but because it was built with the economics in mind from the very beginning. Because in the end, the Empire State Building didn't just reach the sky. It beat the rules. And built a money empire that never stopped working. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe for more videos like this, where we look past the surface and unpack how things actually work behind the scenes.